Okay, so today we are going to go over some shading practice with an ink pen. And I'm going to put my name up here and period number, whichever one that may be. So when we start shading with ink pen, we want to start out really light, and we want to work our way to dark, and we want to do it by layers. And the first thing that I would suggest is that you pull your flip your paper upside down, and when you hold your pen to do your shading, you want it on the edge, just like if you were shading with a pencil. You don't want to be up like this, getting lines like this. This is not what we want. Even if you can get them really close together, that is not what we want. Okay, you don't have as much control. But if you get it on its side and you start moving the pen back and forth, then we get this really light, like fuzzy line. And that is how we want to do shading with pen. So really light, soft, easy, okay? And then we start building with layers. So then when I go one direction, I will turn it and I would then go the other direction. Same process, really light, and bring it across as even in value as you can. And straight. You want your lines to be straight. We don't want little hooks at the end. We don't want curved lines. We don't want it to come up and have these little loops at the end. We don't want that. And then as we go, we can start to build the layers. We'll go on the diagonal and we'll come across with the same very soft shaded edge. Same value, same pressure, same everything, straight lines, even, condensed, to create this nice slow building of value. And then I'll go on the other diagonal and I can keep building this layer by layer by layer. And eventually I get this cool texture that looks like woven fabric, right? So that's what I just want you to get, the feel of shading on the edge of your pen, and not upright, okay? Not like this. Very on the edge. And here's the thing, if you're doing this and it's really light, the teeny tiniest little tip up will increase how much pen or how much ink is flowing out as you shade. Okay, and even the tiniest bit more, and now I have lines. So play with it until you have that soft, fuzzy shading going, okay? Once you feel like you kind of have the feel of how the pen is going to lay down, then we can flip it back over, and we're going to start on our lightest end. And we are going to, in this case, we have 6 value changes that we want to make, okay? And I'm going to start my first layer with two layers. And I'm going to go horizontal and vertical for these layers. So I'm going to start out, and as I do this, I want my stroke marks perfectly straight, nice and soft from line to line. And I'm working on control, so I want to take it to the edge of the line to the edge of the line. One smooth, solid stroke all the way across from line to line. And you want to have it touch as much as you can on either side and not go out of the lines. So there's my one layer. And I will turn my paper, not my hand, and I will do my second layer. This would be my vertical direction. And I will do the same exact thing. And when I do this, I try to clean up my edges a little bit, because in this case, with these boxes, we're working on nice, solid edges, okay? And I work my way across, and I'm really working at trying to keep my value shading even all the way across, okay? And when I finish, I'll sometimes come in even lighter than I was, and I'll try to solid up my edges just a touch. But you have to be really careful because you don't want your edges darker. So I do it super, super light, okay? So there is a nice light value. That's gonna be our lightest value at 2 layers of shading, okay? Vertical and horizontal. So our next box, we're going to add in 3 layers. So we're gonna do our vertical layer, we're gonna do our horizontal layer. When we get to that point, it should match this one perfectly. And then we will add 1 more layer on the diagonal, which should increase this one by 1 layer of value, okay? So I'm gonna start off with my vertical shading. And again, line to line, soft, fuzzy. We wanna try to avoid any distinct lines, keep our value texture even all the way across. And touch line to line, straight, no curve, no hooks, no loops. And then I'm gonna turn my paper, and you can see it's kind of solid here and here because I was going that direction with the line, but at the top we have some gaps and at the bottom. So when I do this direction, I can kind of clean those up, right? And make sure that the edge is nice and sharp. And then again, nice horizontal shading all the way down, trying to keep it an even value, no obvious pen marks. And now my 2 values match. I have 2 layers on both. The layers have been kept consistent, they match. So now I'm gonna add a layer on the diagonal, same pressure, same angle on my pen, and I'm gonna come across nice and straight, nice and smooth, try and keep my value the same throughout my entire strokes, all the way through. Black line to black line, okay? Now, I did add this layer. It's not super, the value change wasn't very obvious. So I can come in and I can just go over it a little bit more. Increase that just a touch more. And get my value. So I have a little bit higher value, and actually this will make it a little bit darker than I originally intended, but you know, that's okay. So I'm gonna come in and I'm gonna try to clean up some edges, which I have to be very, very careful. Very light, very on the edge, very, very on the edge of your pen. We're gonna go lighter than any of our layers really were, because if you're going over existing layers, you're going to end up making the edges darker. So you wanna be very, very careful. But I like to clean that up just a touch. And then if I have a light spot in the middle, I can kind of fill it in a little bit. Okay, so that was a bit more of a value change than I had originally wanted, but that's okay. We have a light one, and then we have our next one, and then this one we would add 4 layers, okay? Vertical, horizontal, on the diagonal, and then on the other diagonal, okay? So that's what I'm gonna do. And again, we're gonna try and we're gonna keep our values nice and light, edge to edge, all the way through, one big stroke. Nice and tight. I can kind of go back through and even it out if I need to. And I can only do that because I keep it really, really light. Okay, so I have a layer this way now. I'm going to do my horizontal layer. This is when I'll clean up these edges. Nice and tight, nice and close, nice and fuzzy, nice even value all the way through. Okay. Now I'm going to do this vertical, and once I get the vertical, it should match. And one tip when you're doing this, do not plant your wrist or arm. Keep them light and sort of floating above the table a little bit, because that way they can move freely back and forth. Okay, so now these two match, and now I can turn it and we'll go on the other diagonal. Again, you need to keep your angle the same all the way through, okay? So now that will have increased my value. I do have some sort of white spots. So if I come in really, really light in those white spots only, I can kind of start to clean that up just a touch along the edge. Really, really light, so I don't increase my value anywhere else. Okay, I'll come in just right in the middle, kind of even it out a little bit. And now I have some increases, okay? So something I also want to show you guys, I'll flip it over again. When I'm holding my pen on the angle to do my shading, if you keep the back of your hand up, you're going to go back and forth and you're going to create a straight line, or more likely to, okay? If you're holding your pen like this and you start shading, the bigger you get, right? Look at what happens, because you're moving your hand and it starts to curve your line. And we don't want a curved line. So it's better for you to keep the back of your hand facing up, and you are more likely to then go back and forth and get a straight line. So that's my tip for straight lines if you're struggling to keep your lines straight. On the diagonal, those are a little bit harder to maintain, okay? So our next box here, we're going to put in 5 layers. Now, we have 4 directions because we have vertical, we have horizontal, we have diagonal, and we have the other diagonal. So when you get through that, your 4 layers, you have to start over with vertical again, okay? And then as you go to 6, you will do vertical, horizontal, diagonal, other diagonal, and then vertical, and then horizontal, and so on and so forth. So you just start the order over again, okay? But it is important to layer those directions and not to just do all of your shading in the same direction, because it doesn't give you the nice, even, smooth texture that we are looking for with this technique. Okay, so again, back of my hand is up. My arm and wrist are not planted solid on the table. I am on the edge of my pen, and I am taking my layer from black line to black line, not going out of the lines, but touching them all the way across, nice and even value all the way across. Then I'm going to turn my paper, not my hand, and I'm going to do my horizontal layer. Same exact thing, same angle, same pressure, keeping my arm not planted to the table. Nice even value all the way across. Clean up my edges as I come through. Now, if you notice, that one matches this one. Now I'm going to add my my diagonal layer here. And again, same concept, same angle, same pressure, even value all the way across. Touch black line to black line. Do not go out of line. Keep it even, consistent all the way across. And then I can turn and go on the other diagonal. Nice and on the edge. Back of my hand upwards, straight lines, touching black line to black line within the lines. Don't go out of the lines. Practice control. If you are having trouble keeping your lines consistent, slow down your shading. That is most likely what is going to help you the most. Most of the time when people are learning, they go too fast. So here's my 5th layer, vertical layer. Try to be nice and even. Try and really, really lightly kind of clean up a little bit of the edge. Okay, so now we've increased a value again. Here we are going to go with 6 layers, vertical, horizontal, on the diagonal, on the other diagonal, or vertical, and then horizontal again. Okay, so we're going to start out. The more we practice this, the more accurate we are with it, the better we will get, and the nicer that our artwork that we work on will turn out. So turn my paper and do my horizontal layer now. Again, nice soft fuzzy line, consistent value all the way through. That one now matches that one. Turn it onto the diagonal and add that in. Nice and even and consistent. Edge to edge. Really focus on not going over. So this one should match that one now, which is pretty close. Then I will turn it and I will go on the other diagonal. And you will probably start to notice that as you build up layers, the ink rolls on a little bit easier, a little less fuzzy and soft. But you still want to aim for that. So I've got both my diagonals, so it should match there, which it pretty much does. Then I'm going to come back and do my second vertical, which will allow me to clean up these edges pretty well. Nice and tight, nice and straight. We want that texture of woven fabric. So now these two should match. And now to bring this one value shade higher, we'll put in our horizontal line, which will now allow me to clean up that edge and the bottom edge. Nice and consistent, light, even, close together, all the way down edge to edge. One long stroke. So now we are a value shade higher. Now we can come to this one and we will do 7 layers. And we will go vertical, horizontal, diagonal, other diagonal, vertical, horizontal, and another diagonal, okay? When I finish, I overlook the whole thing and see if it does seem to have value changes the way that I want it to have. And we just touch up areas to make sure it looks nice like we want it to look. So here's my nice, even, smooth first layer, vertical. I turn it, and I'm going to do my horizontal. Again, kind of clean up my edges a little bit here. Take my layer all the way down, full strokes from edge to edge, straight, light, all the way down. Now I come on and do this on the vertical, or on the diagonal. can turn it to the other diagonal. All the way across. A nice one long smooth stroke, nice and straight, same angle all the way through. So I now have 4. I'm going to come in and lightly touch up some of my edges where it's lighter. And now I will start my my rotation again, my layers again. So vertical, this is going to be my 5th layer. So it should match in there. Or here, this sort of matches there a little better. Which means I may be not being as consistent as I would like, but that's okay. We're gonna come across, add in this layer. This should make it match the box next to it, which it doesn't quite. It's a little light, but that's okay. The best thing you can do when you have, when you're a little light and you need a little more value than maybe you have, don't add pressure to your layer, add another layer. Because the bottom line is it doesn't entirely matter if this is 7 layers or 8, as long as the value change is darker. But it needs to be done with layers and not more pressure, because then you just sort of damage the paper and you lose that cool texture that we want. Because this texture, if you look at it, should look like, you know, woven fabric, almost like denim. Okay, so as I look at this, I do see, you know, a value change with each square, right? So that's kind of what we're looking for. Then as we come down here, we kind of want the same thing, but instead of distinct transitions or lines between our values, we want it to be one smooth transition. Okay, so for example, here's one of my samples I've already done where it's really, really light and it slowly fades up to dark, or I guess fading would be from the dark, fades down to the light. Okay, so that's what we're going to work on, which means now we need to do our layers all the way across. So our first layer that would be easiest to do would be our vertical, because this is a short distance this way, and we just have to keep it going for a long ways until we get over here somewhere under the lightest area, and then we'll fade it out. Okay, so again, make sure the back of your hand is facing upwards so that you get your straight line. Your pen is on a nice slant and you're getting that soft, fuzzy, barely there layer of ink. And just keep working the pen back and forth until you build up a layer, a nice light layer, keeping your values nice and even all the way across, line to line, one solid stroke from the edge to the edge. Keep your arm and your wrist floating above the table, not planted down, so that you can just pull your whole arm back, and you don't have to stop mid-stroke, because it's very difficult to start again without making having some kind of mark to notice, like kind of through here how it changed. I can come back on it and blend that out a little bit. Okay, so now I have my first layer. This second layer is the one that's a little bit harder because we have to come all the way across. And the other thing is I want there to be sort of a flicked ending rather than just an abrupt end. Okay, so for example, if you were to come across and just end versus sort of flicking it out where it tapers to the end, okay? That'll give you a more blended look. So as you're coming across, on this side we want it to touch the line, but on this side we kind of want it to taper and flick off. Okay, but we still want this to be nice and close, nice and tight, and straight. And the longer your lines are, the harder it is to keep them straight and parallel. They'll start to swoop down a little bit. So just nice and straight and even all the way across. Keep them as compact as you can. It is a little bit harder when they are so long. So just be slow and easy and steady and light, very light touch. Try to keep it balanced value all the way through. And then I just kind of, if you keep it light and sort of tapered and flicking motion at the end, you can kind of come in and blend out your end a little bit and make it a little smoother. Be slow and meticulous so that you can keep your values even. And I kind of touch up this end a little bit as well. And now I have a second layer all the way across. So our third layer, we will start on the diagonal and we'll start to fade it out. When we get to this section, we'll start to kind of fade it out. Okay, so I'm going to start on the diagonal, nice and light on the edge. Back my hand upwards position and keep this angle consistent all the way through. So that is the difficult part of this layer. You have to keep the angle the same all the way through. And again, line to line without going outside of the lines as best as you can. And then as you get underneath this second to the last box, start to fade it out. And then we're going to turn it and go on the other diagonal. Same process on the edge, as light as you can go. Same exact angle. All the way across until you get to that same area that you faded the other one out, and you'll fade this one out and it'll kind of balance the two at the end. So I have, as these are transitioning, I can see a little bit here where it's transitioning, but I will hold off until the end and kind of blend that out. But for now, I'm just going to kind of come in and clean up some edges a little bit where it's light, kind of make it nice and balanced. You know, I could maybe okay, so we've now done both diagonals, vertical and horizontal, so we're starting back at the beginning and we're going to go vertical all the way across, but this time we're going to start to fade out below the third box. So on the edge, nice and light, nice and even, edge to edge, solid stroke, nice and straight, all the same things all the way across. And as I get underneath this third box, I will start to fade it out, which means I take pressure off and I widen out my stroke just a little bit, okay? And then we have to do our horizontal line. And this one, again, will end underneath this third box, okay? So, as I'm doing these lines and bringing them across, I'm just stopping them a little bit sooner. Again, on the edge, fuzzy, soft lines. Nice and consistent, nice and straight, nice and close together, compact. Okay. When I finish, I do like to kind of come in nice and light and try to clean up the edge a little bit where it's lighter, but you have to be very, very light-handed when you do that, or you just darken up your edge more than anything else. Okay, so now we're kind of fading out. We're somewhere in this vicinity, and now we're going to start with our diagonal and fade it out somewhere through here, okay? So again, on the edge, back of my hand is facing up. I'm doing a nice light diagonal shade, same direction, same angle, same everything all the way through. And as I get here, I'm gonna start fade it out. Then I'm gonna turn it and I'm gonna do the same thing. Nice, light, consistent diagonal, and then start to fade it out. Clean up my edges just a touch. Okay. And now I'm back to another layer of vertical. And I will come through and I will bring this across and I will fade it out before I get to the end of this box up here. So kind of start to fade it out, less pressure, spread out my lines just a little bit. I also kind of like to come in and add a little bit of horizontal because I like the very end of my my box on this lower one to be a little bit darker than that value, and then fade out from there when I'm done. So now I'm done, right? But I'm gonna look over this box and I'm gonna look for like lighter inconsistent areas. You be very, very careful. It's very easy to quickly start getting things too dark. But you can balance out some of your transitions a little bit. Okay, and now we have a nice soft transition out. There we go. Okay, so the next thing that we want to do is we want to start talking about our shapes, okay? So we're going to start off with our sphere. And like we discussed in our notes when we were taking notes on shading, is we need to think about shading objects in terms of light and how the light reflects off the object. So if we're going to turn this into a sphere, and we have a sun, and it is shining down this direction onto our sphere, okay? So we're going to need a highlight right up here on the fattest part of the sphere that's closest to the light. And when you have a highlight, you don't draw it in on a hard line of the highlight. It needs to kind of fade to the highlight and fade out of the highlight, right? So we want to keep that in mind. And then whatever part of we got to think about our shadows. And so the part that's farthest away from the light will be in darker shadow. And then you will have midtones in between, blending the dark shadow to the really light highlight. Okay, and then the last thing we'll need to think about is a cast shadow underneath. So we're going to start out with directly across from where this light is hitting, we're going to start to add in our light layer, and we want to follow the contour of the circle. So this is where, if we have our hand turned, we now have a little more control to do a curved line, okay? And we want it to be follow the direction of the sphere and be light, 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 consistent, even, and it's going to fade all the way up and blend into where our highlight should be. So a sphere is a little more like slow and meticulous. We've got to do some turn. And everything's following the curve of the sphere, okay? And we're going to bring this up as soft and as easy as we can and start to blend it into our highlight. And then we want the highlight, it needs to have the highlight needs to have the same shape as the sphere. So if the sphere is circle, then the highlight is in a circle as well, not an oval, okay? So as we do the edges, we're wanting to bring this more into a sphere. And then you would have the ever so slight shading as it started to roll back away from us. So we'll kind of add that in. Again, blend it really, really soft. Really, really, really soft. Okay, so we have this in, and it's pretty soft and blended, and our highlights pretty rounded out like our sphere, okay? So now we can come back again directly from where the light is and start to add in another layer, going in the same directionality because it's a sphere. We want it to be rounded with the rounded curve of the sphere. Now right here we've got a little bit of a transition. We're going to have to try to mask that out as I add in layers here. If you start to get really dark in an area, move on and start to fade out from it, because if you keep trying to blend it, you're just going to end up making it darker and darker and darker. So just kind of move on from it. Keep blending, and as you add layers and layers, hopefully we can then blend it away. But for now, If you get too stuck on it, you'll just end up making it worse. And we're fading, 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 fading. We do not want to take this all the way up to the top of where our highlight, like our lightest layers that lead to our highlight are. We do not want to go all the way to it. Okay, so again, sort of directly away from our light, we can come in and we can put a bit of a line. And then, so this is like our vertical line, right? We're going to start to do cross lines, but we want them to sort of follow the curve of our sphere. And we want them to sort of taper and not just end. And this midline is where we would start to now curve them the other direction, okay? So they're going to curve up, follow the curve of our sphere, but as they start coming around to the front, that curve gets less and less shallow. I got to turn it here so I can get that curve correct, because we want it, again, to follow the curve of our sphere. And then we'll turn this one this way so we can follow the curve of our sphere as we come up. And then we can come back again directly from where our light is supposed to hit, and we can start to add in another layer going this direction. And again, we're going to want to fade that. And this is kind of a fatter area through here, so it might have a little bit of a highlight or a little bit lighter of shading through the middle section. So as I start to put this in, start to leave a little bit in the middle there. And again, the parts that roll away, they'll be a little bit darker, but it'll fade out as it comes and rolls out fatter. So this time as I'm doing the lines, they're a little bit shorter to help make that bottom part of that ball or this sphere a little bit darker, right? Okay, so now we have our shadows in. You could probably tweak with these for quite a bit to get it nice and perfect. But so we have our shadow in. Now we need, and we have our midtones and our highlight. So the last thing we need is our cast shadow. So if the light's shining down, it's going to create a bit of a shadow cast off to the side, okay, because of the way this angle is. So we're going to put in a nice light layer, and it's vaguely the shape of the item. Okay, and now I'm going to turn and I'm going to try to do the same, and it will be darker the closer to the item that is casting the shadow than it will be away from it, right? So as I'm drawing or making this shading, I want to keep that in mind, and then I can come in and do sort of a on the diagonal. Another diagonal. But again, the closer to the object, the little bit darker that cast shadow will be. So now we have a shadow created by our sphere, okay? For this one, we're going to do it like it's an open cylinder. And again, we'll have our sun at this side shining this direction. We'll keep the same light. So this side of our sphere will be the light highlighted, and it will come around and get darker. But if this is open, now that it will be darker closer to the sun because it's being blocked by the wall on the inside, and then it will get lighter over here where the light is actually able to get in and reflect, okay? Because it's open. So I'm going to work with just the outside first, and I'm going to do the lightest layer, almost nothing, and then as I move away, I'll get a little bit darker. And again, edge to edge, line to line, solid all the way through, even value, straight up and down, because this is straight up and down, this cylinder. But when we come here, we want to follow the line of this curve, okay? So, and we want our horizontal line to fade a little bit at that side. So I'm going to now have sort of palm up where I'm doing it like this, where I can curve it. Nice and light and tight, consistent. Keep that curve. Follow that curve around. I'll go through and just try to fill in any little gaps that I have to make this stay nice and consistent. The bottom might be a little bit darker than the top by just a slight bit. Okay, so now I can come in and I can do a diagonal, okay? And I'm going to do a diagonal from this corner. And I'm just going to bring it nice and consistent. All the way across, and then I'm going to fade it out a little bit. And we'll do the same from the other side on the other diagonal. And in this case, I keep my diagonals a little bit lighter just because this is a round cylinder, so our diagonal lines maybe don't go with the roundness of our object, so I would be a little bit less pronounced with them. Now I'm going to come in and do another layer of vertical. Actually, I like to pull towards me rather than push with my stroke, so I'm going to turn my paper, and I'm going to come in and do this line to line, and then I'm going to start to fade it out. And then I'm going to come in and do my vertical, kind of clean up my edges again, following the curve of my cylinder with a nice flicked edge or tapered edge of my line, but no hooks, okay? Be careful not to hook the end of your flick here. So something I'd like to point out, when you first lay down ink, if you want to use a blending tool, when you first lay it down, you can, to soften edges, it will work. But when you do a blending tool, a couple things to remember is that you blend on the edge, not the tip. Never, never the tip. You should never, never smash down this tip. We always blend with the very edge, not the tip. And then we can kind of soften up our ink a little bit here. And then I would come through and I would just kind of darken my deeper part, clean up some edges. Just deepen up this back part a bit. Of course, the part rolling away from the light would be a little bit darker than the part in the light. And I want to soften this, so I'll just really lightly come in and soften up these transitions. Okay, so now I have that shadowed, and now I want to do the inside. So with the inside, it's following the curve of the top, not the bottom, okay? So we want to come in and we want to put in our really light layer, and it is going to taper at the top and get darker as it comes down. Okay? Then we want to come in, and when we do our vertical, this is straight up and down. So we still want this to be straight up and down, okay? And it is going to be darker, deeper down in, and then get lighter as it comes up towards the top. So we taper our lines as we come up. Okay, so there's our first two. Then I can come in and I can darken lines down at the bottom. Again, we're following the curve, this curve. I can bring in my little blending tool here on the edge, kind of start to soften this up a little bit. Okay, so as I'm coming along, I want to darken the edge of the inside a bit. Okay, and then kind of fade that up and out as we come. And then we can do another vertical. And again, I'm gonna start to shore those up, taper them a little bit more, increase my depth at the base. Okay, so now we have, it looks like there's a, it's open, it gets dark as it goes down. There's light reflecting on the inside of that, and there's light reflecting on the outside of this. Now the last thing we need is a cast shadow, and because the light is coming this way, we would end up getting a shadow coming out this way. And I like to do my nice vertical following the length of the shadow first. And then I would come in and add a layer on the opposite direction. Again, it's going to be darker in the middle, so I will add more layers towards the middle. And then I'll do a diagonal. I can do another diagonal this direction as well. And the closer it is to our object, the little bit darker it will be, and then I can taper it out from that. And we have a bit of a cast shadow. Okay, so on our cone, we're gonna add a little bit of something to the cone here, okay? So we're gonna have our sun or our light source out here. And it'll be shining this direction, okay? So we're gonna have a highlight here, but when you have a rounded object like this, you will get a little bit of a highlight on the opposite side, just a tiny little bit of one. And we would have probably gotten that on this as well, just kind of depending on how far around the object the light is. It's a little bit harder when we add that, so we started off practicing without it, and here we will add it. So, because this goes from small to large, we will have a larger section of shadowing, and it will slowly get smaller to the top, okay? And also because it's round, it follows this curve. So that's where I'm going to start. I'm going to start down here, following this curve, and I'm going to come back and forth really tight and close with a flicking. And I'm going to leave space on either end. Generally a little bit more on this side than this side. I'm following that curve, but I'm getting smaller and smaller as I get to the top of this. So I want to make sure that this edge is is staying smaller than the other side. So I can kind of come back, continue to follow that curve. And we're going to take this all the way up to our point here. Okay, so it's wider at the bottom. This side has more of a highlight. I would I'm going to come in with my blending tool and I'm just going to run over my ink real quick here. Okay, so now we want, we're going to have our vertical line. And I'm putting it up through the middle, okay? And it's going to fan and fade because this is a triangle. Okay, so fan and fade. It's going to do the same on the other side. It's going to fan and fade. Okay. And on this one, I'll come back and I'll do another layer kind of up through the middle here. You got to do your blending right when you do the layer or it will not smear the ink, because when the ink dries, it's done. So if you haven't done your blending in the very beginning, it isn't going to happen. So don't bother. Like, and then fan and fade. Okay, and then I'm gonna do a little more on this side. And then fade. You could even come through in the middle and kind of add a little bit of on the diagonal. If you do it nice and soft and gentle, and fade it. Okay, so now we're gonna have a cast shadow. And actually, if we're doing just a tiny the way that our shadowing is looking right now, it looks like the light is coming from behind and we're looking at the back. So we probably want to bring this highlight even smaller. There we go. Okay, so now we're gonna have a cast shadow. And I'm gonna bring this cast shadow out, and it's gonna be white at the base, and then it's going to taper because this is a cone. And it's as wide as it truly is, and then it tapers out. And then I can come in and I can do a layer this way. I can come in and do a layer on the diagonal. Nice and light. I can do one on the other diagonal here. And again, the closer to the object, the darker it'll kind of be, and it'll kind of fade out. Okay, so now we have our three shapes, and they are shaded and done, and that is what we're looking for there. Okay, so now we can move on down here to our teacup, and the teacup is very similar to our sphere and cylinder because it's round, but it also has the open top. Okay, so the way that I went about shading it is like the light is just coming down on kind of on it from maybe this sort of direction. Okay, so this is the fattest part, so it's going to be sort of light, and also inside it's going to be darker and then kind of get lighter back over in here a little bit. And so I'm going to start out following the curve of my cup from the bottom. Really, 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 really light. And bring it up. And kind of fade it. And then I'm going to bring it around from the edge of the cup a little bit, kind of tapering it as I go up. It is kind of curving away. And I am still trying to follow that curve a little bit. And then on this side, I'm going to do the same, but it's going to come out a little bit farther. I'm going to go from this direction, I think. Try to get it a little more consistent with the value I already did. A little bit lighter. Okay, now I'm going to come back and I'm going to do another layer. Just really, really light along the bottom and kind of fade it up to what I've already faded. And again, a little bit this way, just a little shorter than what I did before, but still kind of tapering those lines. Same on this side, a little bit shorter than I did before, but tapering those lines and starting to blend them. Okay, so we're starting to get the rounded. So now I want to bring up the middle line, and if this is the fattest portion of my cup, then that's going to kind of be the straight part, and then it's going to start, these upwards lines will follow the curve of the cup. And they become a little less curved as they get closer to the middle. Then on this side, I follow the curve of my cup, tapering the lines as they come up. Okay, so it starts to give us a little more roundedness. And on this end, I want the lines to come a little bit more up, but maybe not quite as thick as they are at the bottom. Same over here, I'll kind of start to taper them in a little bit. Okay, and then I will come back and I will do the another vertical at the bottom, or I guess this would be horizontal, and darken it up towards the bottom and fade it out as it comes up. Okay, and we'll do that a little bit again along the edge here to deepen the depth of the curve. We'll kind of do it over on this side again as well. And just kind of, again, deepen the depth of that curve. So now we have the curve of our cup in, so we can now come in and do the curve inside. So if the light is sort of shining this way, it's going to be a little bit darker on this side than the other, but we are going to follow the curve of our cup. And then we want our vertical line is going to be straight up and down. But as we're curving around here, it's going to follow the line of our cup. And as it gets deeper into our cup, we're going to get a little bit darker. Okay, and then So back here, our handle's gonna come off of our cup. The top of our handle is going to be highlighted, but the underneath is going to be a little bit shadowed. So we want to bring lines along the back end of our cup here. And then I can come through and I can just do a little bit of a different direction, just very subtly. And as it curves around here, then the light will start to hit the top of that and shadow kind of underneath. Okay, so now we're gonna have a little bit of a back up in here is nice and dark, so this little rim is going to be pretty dark. So I'm gonna put in a layer following this way, and then I'm gonna put in an opposite direction layer just along this little rim. Get that kind of dark, and then we are going to want a bit of a shadow from our handle here, and then around for the cup. So a little bit of a cast shadow. And we'll go the opposite direction on our cast shadow here. Of course, the deeper into the shadow, the darker it would be. And then we would have a little touch of a cast shadow underneath the plate, okay? And since the light is kind of shining down this way, the shadow is going to be underneath the plate, but maybe a little bit more on this side. And then under the plate all the way around. I'm gonna do my opposite direction here, and then I can go on a diagonal here. So the deeper the shadow up closer to the object, the little bit darker it will be. So I'll darken that up and fade it out just a touch. Okay, so there is my teacup, and really the way that I've done these shadows, we probably want this to be a little bit darker coming around here, if we're being a little more honest here. Balance it out a little bit. Okay, so that's our teacup. So our last item is our tree trunk. So the first thing that I want to do on the tree trunk is I'm going to start a sort of shading in one direction on my tree trunk all the way through. And I'm going to keep the same angle, same value, same pressure, same everything all the way through all the branches. So it gets harder as they get tighter. Okay, and then I'm going to come through and I'm going to do a layer the opposite direction. But again, I'm going to try and keep that same angle, same pressure all the way up my tree. Okay, so we have a base now on our tree. So one of the things that when we're looking, like these are roots down here, okay? So when you're kind of deep into the root, it's going to be dark on one side. So we kind of want to do that. We kind of want to create that feel. And then we also kind of want to create a little bit darker on the edges of our tree. But it'll kind of fade into the middle. So it's a little bit subtle that there's that texture, okay? Now, as we start to do branches, as we come around, we're going to add that same edge underneath is a little bit darker, and it'll fade to lighter, okay? Now it'll follow this one out a little bit, and then this will be a little bit darker and fade in. So you don't have a lot of room with this. Now this is the bottom of the branch on this side, okay? There's not a lot of room on these branches, so it's just a few little lines, very subtle. We're also going to darken on this side. And we're going to give a little bit of texture through here. And then we want to darken on this side underneath a little bit. And kind of fade it out. So this, we don't want our tree trunk to be all sort of one value, right? We want to create a little bit of variation in it. And veining in the trunk, so that it has a bit of a texture. Okay, I don't know if you guys can kind of see that. Bit of a texture. Okay, now we're going to add leaves. And when we do this, trees have like sections to them and shape to them. We're going to section out. So each of our little branch sections are going to get a section of leaf. So what I want you to do, we're going to do scrumbling. which is okay. So we get a ball on this lower one. Now I also want a ball just kind of random on these two, okay? And I'm gonna want a ball kind of random scrambled on this one and this one. I guess we'll make these like one connected at the top here. Okay, and then we're gonna have a separate little ball here, and we're gonna have another small little one here, okay? Now, I am gonna put one in the middle, but we'll hold off for the moment. But when we're doing this, so here's our little ball right here, and when we start doing it, the underneath of our scrumble of that section, it's going to be darker, right? And it's gonna kind of wrap up, and then it's gonna fade, and it's gonna stay light at the top. And then this little section of ball is gonna have the same. It's gonna kind of get dark at the bottom of this little section, and this is gonna kind of define the little section, and then it'll kind of fade up and be light at the top, okay? So we're getting it dark at the bottom, dark at the bottom. This is starting to define our sections apart from each other, okay? So we have this one, it's going to be, you know, darker down here at the bottom and then get lighter as it goes up, because the underneath parts of the tree get less light, right? So on here, on our little one over here, we're gonna do the same. We're gonna start to darken up our little section and then kind of fade it up to the lighter part. And if you'll notice, when I do scrumbling, I'm kind of squiggle all over. I don't just do these little round squiggles, okay? We want it to be kind of organic and random. So again, darker at the bottom and then kind of fade it up. And then I kind of want one more little cluster kind of here in the middle to kind of fill in our tree a little bit. But we want our clusters to stay a little bit separated. So, and then I'm going to add some dark at the bottom of this one. And I can go through and I can just add a little bit of darkening, a little bit of fading. Just tweak with them a little bit. And now I have this tree that has some depth to it, okay? The last thing that I could do is add a little bit of a ground, and I'm just gonna give it a little bit of an arced ground here, and I'm just going to do a very, very light shading on my ground. It's gonna kind of go up in between the roots. Very, very, very light on my ground. Fade it out. This will be kind of like a cast shadow almost, but it's ground. So I've done it that direction. Now I can come in and I can come this direction, and we can leave the outside edging of the ground rough, but we want that line, horizon line, to have kind of a defined edge. So that's where I will kind of come in and clean that up and make sure it's solid at the edge. And I can go at a different angle here really, really lightly. We definitely want to keep the ground lighter than our tree trunk. We'll just add in a little bit of ground for a little bit of context. Okay, so there is our tree. All right, so we have our tree, our teacup, our cone, our cylinder, our sphere, and our 2 bars of faded out, or of value changes. One very distinct layers and one with a gradient fade of layers. Okay, so there you have it.